North American Society for the Psychology of Sport and Physical Activity, NASPSPA, will celebrate its 50th anniversary in June of 2017. As part of the celebrations, it was decided that we would interview the previous distinguished scholars. My name is Penny McCullough, and today I will be chatting with Dr. Larry Brawley. Through 2016, NASPSPA has named 24 distinguished scholars. Dr. Brawley was named a distinguished scholar in 2015. This interview is being conducted in March of 2017. Good afternoon, Dr. Brawley. How are you today?
I'm well, Dr. McCullough.
Super. So let's go ahead and get started. So Dr. Brawley, please tell us a little bit about your academic background.
Well, I received my bachelor's degree from the University of Calgary, and it was a bachelor's in physical education. And after doing that particular degree, I went on to the University of Oregon to take a master's degree where I studied physiology and anatomy, which might seem quite different than the field I'm in now. And then finally, I went to the Pennsylvania State University for my PhD.
Great. So when did you decide to pursue a doctoral degree in kinesiology, and how did you decide what university you'd go to? And tell us a little bit about your mentor.
I'll try to make that complex story as brief as possible, but my doctoral degree in kinesiology at Penn State was really I was first accepted as a physiologist. However, in the interval between when I was accepted and when I actually went to Penn State, there was a conference by a distinguished professor in psychology from Penn State. Her name was Carolyn Sheriff, where she talked about the child and physical activity. And her talk was not only compelling, but fit so well with what I was learning in my coaching career with swimming that I decided to make a switch. And after a fairly complex process, I was accepted at Penn State under the initial mentorship of the famous Dot, who is I'm blocking her name.
But it is.
Thank you very much, Dorothy Harris, and that was an interesting year because Dorothy had a background in physiology as well, but had gone into psychology. However, our interests parted in one way, and the next person that happened to arrive at Penn State was Dr. Daniel Landers, and he became my mentor, and his interest in theory and experimental processes were part of the reason for my choice with him as mentor.
Okay, great. And what do you recall as some of your first exposure, interest, or involvement in research? What do you remember about that?
Well, there are two. One, actually, I had at Queen's University, where I was an instructor, and we were looking at the physical fitness and attitudes of Canadian firefighters towards engaging in physical activity on a regular basis. And of course, once they got into the service, their physical activity declined, which wasn't exactly desirable for their training in the fires that they had to fight. But my second experience under my mentor was that he brought some data from the University of Illinois, and he wanted me to analyze it. And of course, I hadn't taken my statistics course yet, and so that was a very interesting experience that required had a steep learning curve, but it was useful to me. So I think my first exposure to research at Penn State, at least, was trial by fire.
But you put the fire out, it sounds like. So tell us a little bit about your doctoral dissertation.
Well, it's interesting. My doctoral dissertation wasn't exactly in the area particularly favored by Dr. Landers, but after a while he did accept it. Basically, my doctoral dissertation was in the area of attribution theory, and I was interested in that, partly influenced by Dr. Carolyn Sheriff, just and by virtue of social psychology generally, where I took a lot of courses in that area when I was studying. This particular doctoral dissertation had to do with children's causal attributions in competitive sport, and taking a look at both non-motivational and motivational interpretation. And basically it involved a field experiment where kids, boys in hockey, were assigned to either a condition where they were very public, where their results of their outcome would be displayed in a newspaper, very prominent newspaper, and then the other condition was, of course, where people were anonymous, and so they were then asked questions in each of those two conditions about what kind of attributions they would make and what kind of credit they would take or avoid for the various outcomes. And so those conditions were crossed with sort of win-loss outcomes. And basically, it was a new study in the field of attributions, and probably one of the initial ones, at least in sport, where conditions were actually manipulated, and we were looking at moderator variables. And so that particular dissertation then led to a review by both Dr. Glenn Roberts, and then later a review, or about the same years actually, with Dr. Jack Rajewski on causal attributions in sport and physical activity.
Okay, great. I don't think I realized that was your dissertation. Thanks for sharing.
No problem.
So, Dr. Brawley, your distinction of becoming a Distinguished Scholar of NASPA recognizes your long-standing contributions in the areas represented by your research. So we'd now like to hear a little bit more about some of your scholarly endeavors. So tell us, what sort of research interests did you have early on? You told us a little bit, at least, of your doctoral dissertation, but then did you continue to pursue that line of research, or if you changed your line of research, tell us a little bit about how all that happened.
Well, I've had a long career, and so understandably my lines of research and my interests changed over some 30 years, but initially, I certainly continued to do some attribution research as one aspect of my research program. However, fairly early on in that career, I became interested, partly prompted by Carolyn Sheriff and by Dan Landers and their mutual interest in group cohesion, to collaborate with Dr. Bert Caron and Dr. Neil Widmeyer in trying to understand a whole variety of things associated with the group, but in particular about group cohesion and whether it was a determinant or an antecedent of the processes that went on within sports teams and ultimately within exercise groups. But concurrent with all of that, I was also interested in, for the most part, social cognitive processes that motivate people to either adhere or to, for example, to drop out of physical activity. So I've always had that kind of interest going on as a part of my research program. And that line of research sort of went in parallel with the group dynamics cohesion research until almost until Bert Caron passed away. And most of my research now that I've been funded for as a Canada Research Chair has focused around the social cognitive influences on people's exercise and physical activity behavior, both in healthy populations and in symptomatic populations.
Okay, great. You did mention a long time working with Dr. Caron and Dr. Widmeyer. Some of you are at different universities. How did you keep that relationship going? Because you certainly had a long line of research with those two gentlemen.
Yes, we actually created a research group, and that particular research group met regularly to both to plan research, to carry out research, and then to write up the research. And that group stayed together for innumerable years. But we were also friends and went to conferences together, presented this work together, and so both a friendship and scholarly relationship grew up over a number of years, and I think that really helped motivate all of us to do the research that we did, that started way back in about 1983 when Bert had a sabbatical and happened to work with Neil and I, who were just down the road at the University of Waterloo, and Bert was down the road at the University of Western Ontario in London.
Okay, great, thanks. Tell us a little bit about the basic questions underlying issues behind your research, and what have you basically tried to learn?
Well, I think one of the things I'm really interested in is what kinds of what I call social cognitive processes influence a variety of different types of behaviors, and it's a lot of the actions and processes that lead up to people doing or not doing physical activity. And one of the most influential theories on my work has been social cognitive theory, or really the agency component of social cognitive theory. And what I've tried to learn and test, as indicated by Bandura, is really what mediators and moderators are things that affect these self-regulatory actions that influence engaging in physical activity. And these go beyond just physical activity, but are central to any kind of understanding for any kind of behavior change. And so my focus has been on understanding both healthy behavior in terms of physical activity, but also the use of things like exercise therapy in cardiac rehab. And in all of those cases, I've found the efficacy or the agency component of social cognitive theory to be very promising. And I think given that theory, social cognitive theory, is a grand theory, we still have a lot more work to do in researching and finding out whether that theory works or not.
Great, thank you. So you certainly had a long history of research and also across a number of different research areas and topics. But think back and tell us about a research project that you were particularly interested in, proud of, or you feel made an impact on the field. And also, were there some other researchers that had a profound influence on you throughout the years?
Well, I'd actually like to say I was the next guru, but not really. I think somebody that I've worked extremely well with, and beyond the group dynamics research and the development of the GEQ that I did with Neil Widmer and Bert Caron, I'm quite proud of that work, and I'm quite amazed, quite frankly, at the number of citations and how widely it's cited today. I'm actually awed by that, because we never expected that kind of long-standing and a widespread influence globally, quite frankly. But the other recent project that deals with some of my other work, and I would say in the last 15 to 16 years, has been my work with Jack Rajewski at Wake Forest University, where we've developed a model of intervention to get people to, first of all, change their behaviors and then to hang on to that. And we've done probably about 13 or 14 different kinds of intervention projects, ranging from pilots to randomized clinical trials, and the effects are quite pronounced, and that work is holding up quite well over the years. And so that particular project, or those projects, and then writing about them as a whole, is something that I'm particularly proud of, and I have to give full credit to Jack Rajewski, a former NASPSPA member, for influencing me, and I think it would be fair to say I influenced him as well on that project.
Okay, great. And could you give us the 1 minute elevator talk? What have you found from that research? Or what are some of the ideas that you?
Well, one of the I think it's fairly clear that we're pretty good if we look at the evidence in physical activity about changing physical activity, particularly in structured fitness training programs. But it doesn't seem to matter what domain we study. As soon as people leave those kinds of structured programs or home-based programs, and they have they're supposed to self-manage their activity for the future as a lifestyle change or self-manage on their own, we see a pronounced decline in physical activity, and that's always been a problem, and that was what motivated us to start the research in the first place. What we found is by using two aspects of theory, self-efficacy and group dynamics principles, we've been able to create an intervention that helps people transition from the intensive aspect of a program to continuing to self-manage their physical activity effectively over a variety of periods of time. And so anywhere between a month post-program to 2 years post-program. And the effects are not only pronounced for physical activity, they're pronounced for social cognitions, and they're pronounced for improvements in physical functions in a variety of different areas. And this seems to be the case whether we're dealing with cardiac rehab, people in arthritis, people in cancer, spinal cord injured patients, and people with multiple sclerosis. That kind of generality has really been influential in terms of us continuing with that work and thinking very seriously about and carrying out interventions that have a more translational base. And some of the work that we've most recently published has been able to show that we can take that intervention and have other people do it in the field, both health educators who are working in rural communities, and then secondly, YMCA leaders.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for sharing that there. So we get a better idea of what you're doing there. That's great. So you've been a long-standing member of NASPSPA for many, many years. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with NASPSPA.
Well, I think my involvement, first of all, has been somebody that I've rarely missed a conference, and I've always tried to take my trainees to NASPSPA, as it's a great proving ground and great testing ground for our trainees, which is one of the major responsibilities we have, and in particular with my role as the Canada Research Chair, it's a major thing that I'm paid to do. So I've always done that, but I also have been involved with organizing conferences, program direction, things of that nature, building programs in a number of different years. I think the first time that Jack Rajeski and I ever met was at a NASPSPA conference, and the second time we met, I think I was program chair for the sport and exercise psychology side of NASPSPA, and that's continued in one way or another up to the present day. So I see NASPSPA as sort of one of my scientific conference homes, and I think my graduate trainees also view it that way, as do some of their trainees, since they're now out and working in various institutions in North America.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you were named a Distinguished Scholar in 2015. What did that mean to you when you were given that award?
Well, it was a complete surprise, and I was taken aback by it. You really don't go around looking for those kinds of things to be awarded. And so it was as you might expect, I'm going to say it was a great honor. I think one of the things that is important to me personally is a phrase that was used by my first department chair, Norm Ashton, at the University of Waterloo in kinesiology. And I asked him at some time, what do you think of these awards like this? And he said, this is the least and the best that your peers can do for you. And I think that is one of the things that underscores how I feel about the Distinguished Scholar. Although there is an award that goes with this particular distinction, I think it's the recognition of your peers and your nominees and so forth is something that's very important, and I'll always remember it. And I'll also always remember the fact that a former graduate student of mine, also with Dan Landers, Dr. Deb Feltz, and I became Distinguished Scholars together in the award ceremony. And so that, given the fact that we both graduated from Penn State in and around the same time, that was a very favorable memory as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So, Dr. Brawley, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us? Ideas for young scholars coming up in the field, future directions, anything else you'd like to share?
I think, without trying to go too much over time, there's lots of ideas I'd like to share, but one of the things that I'd really like to have people hang on to is the use of theory in trying to plan research in general, whether it be experiments or whether it be interventions. And one of the reasons I bring that up, and it seems almost like a trite suggestion, is that, or a common sense suggestion almost, is that having recently attended a major conference in another area, one that I attend fairly regularly, the Society of Behavioral Medicine, it was really surprising to me to see the great debate between whether theory was useful or not in conducting interventions. And there really is a debate. It isn't just an opinion. And that was pretty shocking. And yet there are lots of articles published about the use of theory and how people seem to be going away from that, driven by funding and ideas more than really learning about how to make, for example, an intervention work. So I think that's one of the things that we should come to grips with in the field, whether we're going in the direction of translational research or whether we're trying to apply things and disseminate it all together. We shouldn't lose sight of that just in favor of our funding and just in favor of our strong motivation to help others.
Okay, great. Thanks for that thought. Well, I'd really like to thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to chat with us, and I'm sure many folks will look forward to hearing some of your ideas once we get these posted. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the 50th anniversary celebration in San Diego.
I look forward to the same thing.
Okay, have a great afternoon.
You also. Bye now.